let me get this out of the way. King of the Hill is in my top 10 cartoons of all time. In fact, it is my favorite modern adult cartoon of all time. Second to American Dad, and then probably a tie between The Simpsons and Rick and Morty. But nevertheless, I did see the flaws in the cartoon, but I didn't hold it against the show. In fact, watching the earlier episodes make me laugh for reasons it shouldn't, like the rigid animation and the lifeless looks at times. What I'm trying to say is the flaws are a deal breaker, but the flaws don't always annoy. Alpha J, by the way. In fact, what the writers and animators intend to do can annoy you much more, and what better annoyance in King of the Hill than the main wife herself, Peggy damn Hill. At best, she's a mouthpiece for the story, and at worst, she's an ungrateful, bumptious brat. Trying to keep it PG here. What better, or worse depending on your point of view, episode to show this than Death and Texas? A very unrealistic and confused episode. Not confusing, confused. This episode wants us to side with Peggy Hill when any rational person would side with Hank. Usually how these scams go is that someone unknowing would do something they normally do, such as looking through their mail or email and get the scam and promise of money and go through with it for the money. In this episode, however, we have the egotistical Peggy Hill go through to meet this 40-year-old man on the premise that she has enlightened him. Not only that, but she's going because she has a passion for teaching. If you were going for a character that would want to teach everyone, why make that same teacher so arrogant about the skills that she lacks painfully? If that's the joke, then this is 22 minutes of an idiot not getting what they deserve, and when is that ever funny? Well, you tell me as we dive into this episode.
Fork and the spoon jumped over the moon. Mo.
Luann is never in this episode again until the dinner scene. She has no bearing on the plot and contributes nothing worth caring about. But wait, there's more padding to come. So get this, Bobby hands Peggy a letter that came from prison. The man claims to be a former student who is now on death row. He also states that Peggy Hill was his biggest influence in his life, and the last thing he wants to do is to be taught by her again. This setup is very rushed, and to be honest, it wouldn't bother me if they hadn't wasted so much time padding out the episode. The only slightly funny part was...
Who wants ice cream? Oh.
Straight outta Harlan. Crazy. Mom and Pop name Hank Hill. From the game called Without a 2.
So Peggy Hill decides to meet the student, but Hank advises her not to.
Oh, wait a second here. You're not thinking of going into a prison, are you?
Hank, I am a substitute teacher. With this boy, I did make an impact.
He's in prison, Peggy.
Hank, even though his intentions are good, has a very horrible argument in hindsight. Yes, prison does make it harder to integrate with society again, just like the army or immigration, but you know Peggy Hill isn't going to teach him. She's only going to hear more about herself. She isn't going to teach Spanish. In fact, she never mentions Spanish after the halfway mark. And I have the perfect moment in this episode to prove that. Hank tries to resist more, but Peggy doesn't want to be wrong even when she clearly is. So yes, she's going, Hank, I'm sorry. You should know who you married.
Hank, please. Death row is perfectly safe. There's a code of conduct that all prisoners are obligated to obey.
For a person going on death row, what would stop him from killing you? There's nothing higher than death row besides, well, instant death, which is inevitable either way. So his friends throw a lot of dirt his way, and it makes me wonder how they know what's going on, if they know anything besides the dolled up part. Usually how this goes, Hank tells them first. There's a few subplots in here that don't really start or finish for a long enough duration for you to care. Oh, and here's a crucial point.
Empty your bag on that table. We'll hold on to this. A con could use a mascara applicator to scoop a man's eye right out of his head.
But a visitor can't use an hourglass to smuggle crack? Anyway, you see that guard in that metal detector? He only mentions for her to empty her bag, not her clothes, because that's never the case. But let's assume that Peggy got the full inspection and went through all the tests and all the exams needed to meet the prisoners. Let's assume that this happened. I'm going to tell you later that whatever they did when she first went to prison is nothing compared to a crucial scene later on in this episode. So Peggy meets her former student Wesley Martin Archer, but let's call him Wesley from now on. So they talk, and it's clear that Wesley wants something. He's trying very hard to sway Peggy, but knowing Peggy, that shouldn't be hard.
One night I went with my buddy Ray over to his friend's house, only he wasn't home. So I gave Ray a boost up to the window. He couldn't climb up and hold his gun at the same time. Well, that's why we were there, to return his friend's gun.
Okay, fine. You know what? I don't care what your story is. From what you're telling me, that is still home invasion and manslaughter. Plus, what was so important that you needed to return the gun immediately? It could have waited until tomorrow. Oh, don't have an answer?
So we get inside, and it turns out the guy was home. He was screaming, alarms were ringing, and when a guy yells, "Don't shoot," believe me, it has the opposite effect.
Yes, because when Army generals say not to shoot, they always shoot.
Well, it would be a comedy of errors if it wasn't so tragic.
You don't miss a thing, do you? How do you say, Peggy Hill is the smartest, most talented woman on earth? In Spanish.
That would be Peggy Hill es bueno. Hank, you know, Wes had only the best things to say about you. He was very supportive about your problems with your father.
You gave a convict personal information about... How could you be that naive?
Because any dope that says Peggy Hill enlightened them has her in the palm of their hand. It's simple. She is so self-centered. She wants everyone to know the difference that she makes. But again, this episode wants us to side with that person. But why? Why would I side with her? Do I want her to learn a lesson? An adult in her 40s should know better. So Peggy goes on to teach the prisoner and eventually blends into this full-time job.
I can't help thinking, what if Mrs. Hill had been my full-time teacher? Maybe I'd be able to read these books.
You can't read?
Alright, so who wrote your letter?
You gave that bastard our travel version of the Guinness Book of World Records, and now you're going to teach him to read it?
Hank, I'm a teacher. I sell knowledge, and it doesn't matter to who.
Even murderers?
The one thing I hate in this episode is that Hank is such a poor argument. The better argument here is when people are this nice, you should make sure that that kindness is sincere. I mean, yes, on the outside, it looks like a teacher and a student bonding, but this is an episode that looks horrible in hindsight. When you know Peggy, this episode becomes worse. Hank tries to stop her, but doesn't use logic like a normal person. He uses his good old, "you can't do it because it's not right" argument that he always uses with Bobby.
Oh, that's beautiful. Is that me?
It's an apple.
Did anyone there think that the photo looked like Peggy? No? Self-centered bigotry. That is Peggy Hill. We have a side plot that takes all the intensity out of it and any resemblance of anyone caring about it with a simple reveal. Dale wants to be an executioner, but since we see that he's erased his name off the list, why should I care? There is no tension, so that's not really a subplot to be proud of. We have Peggy pin the prisoner's drawing over Bobby's essay. Let me just stop here. You know what? I'm not nitpicking, okay? You want nitpicking? The animation for Hank in this episode is one of the most rigid moments of awkwardness in this series. But the reason I won't hold it against this, you know, other than the fact that it was of its time, is because this episode doesn't rely much on time-based comedy. It's slower. At least in this episode. Most of the jokes revolve around verbal jokes than physical comedy. So like I said, flaws are flaws, but they don't annoy me. Intention annoys me. From what I can see, Peggy teaches the prisoner full-time, so I can assume that she isn't really available for the full-time jobs at the school for students. Now, I can raise the argument by saying that she feels she's making a difference by teaching a shady prisoner on death row than a classroom full of students of young, moldable minds. And I'm all about teaching the elderly and adults and whatnot. But here's the kicker. Peggy placed this man's opinion above Hank and the Arlen education system and now Bobby because of a few choice words. Literally everything she does is the opposite of what she stands for. But I shouldn't be mad. Knowing her Spanish skills, she should not even be in the education system anyway. You know what? Alright, I'm done. Back to the plot. Oh god, this scene.
Hi, Sam.
Hold it.
So because Peggy comes to teach full-time and watch videos on not how to smuggle drugs, she doesn't have to be checked, even when the monitors go off. It's as simple as that to smuggle drugs into a prison. They check the woman behind her, so they are doing their job, just not with Peggy? You know what, I won't rant about this. This really unrealistic plot. The first time watching this scene didn't seem like much, but when you think about prisons, not jails, but prisons, especially visiting, this scene implies so much because Peggy Hill doesn't smuggle in cocaine not one time, but multiple times throughout the episode, and each time she gets away with it because, well, your guess is as good as mine. So a guard comes over and merely walks behind Peggy. Wesley freaks out and tries to attack the guard for, in his perspective, was trying to touch Peggy Hill.
Hey, don't you dare touch her! You leave Mrs. Hill alone!
No, stop it!
She's too good for you!
No.
She's teaching me to read!
Rewatching this video makes you wonder how much of an act he was putting up, because in my opinion, I think this was planned to evoke sympathy for himself.
There was only 3 days in the pit. I thought the guard was gonna touch her bottom.
Oh, I tried to tell them that you meant no harm, but they would not listen.
Hey, you do know he was going to assault the man, right? He did do something wrong. Oh, but maybe he's mentally unstable. Then why is he available for outside human interaction? You know, sometimes I feel like a sap who feeds in every time a troll trolls me, because this episode is either really aware of its problem or aware of Peggy Hill. He meant no harm. Yeah, keep telling yourself that. So in order to make this review short and non-repetitive, I'm going to use a make that what you will attitude towards the following scenes. So Peggy gets sapped into a story about his grandmother playing Boggle despite not knowing what Boggle is in the scene before. He never said he remembered what it looked like. He said that he wasn't used to the creative teaching, but knowing Peggy Hill, she wouldn't remember that either. So she goes into Wesley's neighborhood and talks to this wife, family member, whatever. She gives him the Boggle set saying,
Wes better get the whole set.
Peggy doesn't notice how excited he is about the sand, which I'll give it to her. I wouldn't think of it at that point either if I was that naive, but instead decides to joke about it.
All right, who covered Wes's drawing with this crap?
Crap? That better not be Bobby. That really better not be Bobby. I just noticed that I put a lot of criticism on Peggy and not the writers. Well, here's how I see it. If you want to blame the writers, go on ahead. But which one hits home more? Criticizing how the author made the work or the work itself? I'll choose either or, but talking about Peggy directly makes this much more easier to get the point across. Hank also doesn't have to explain anything if that's Bobby, so I'm just gonna skip ahead for my own good. Oh my god, if that was Bobby, I swear Peggy Hill would be one of the worst mothers in modern adult animation. Yes, above Lois. So Peggy Hill has to get more sand because of a fight or whatever, but Peggy takes this large hourglass filled with sand to the near top, making it impossible to use effectively. They make it clear that she can smuggle large amounts of cocaine across the guards for Boggle. Peggy doesn't question this once. You know another thing? She doesn't even take it with her to make sure that the sand stays intact. She doesn't do anything but go with the flow. Also, she's teaching Wesley to read with Boggle? That's like trying to teach someone math, not with money, but with Monopoly. Sure, a connection could be made, but that isn't the most practical way, and as a teacher, you should know better. All of those books she gave away, he's never shown to be reading any of them. All of that Spanish, he never seems to have an interest in. He doesn't even write words he knows. I mean, this episode is implying that he knows how to write but not read because of the letter he sent had literary devices in it. I'm not trying to be an elitist about this, seriously. Can you learn how to write and not read, but write a tearjerker and somehow, someway get the information about Peggy Hill to write to her? Only if it's Peggy Hill, I'm guessing. So Wesley reveals the jig and asks her for more cocaine.
Good. Peggy, all this time her sand you've been bringing me?
Oh, don't mention that.
This is coke, Peggy. You've been smuggling me cocaine. That's a federal offense. And you know what? You're gonna bring me more of it. How stupid can you be? I never had you as a teacher. I grew up in Arkansas. I'm almost 40, for cripe's sakes. I wrote every teacher in the Arlen yearbook, and you were the only sap dumb enough to answer.
Yearbooks have addresses in them? I guess I haven't looked at mine so thoroughly. Or did he get the address from somewhere else? But never mind that. Even after all of this, Peggy only cares about being a positive influence, No, not being blackmailed. No, not doing a federal offense. Being influential to a prisoner on death row. So Peggy Hill ends up telling Hank about smuggling cocaine and still wants to protect her ego.
Well, he certainly revealed his true colors. I don't think you'll be going back to see him again.
Hank, I have to, or he will turn me in. They will send me to jail. I guess you're happy now. You get to say, I told you so. Jerk.
But he didn't even say... Just make of it what you will. Just make of it what you will. Just make of it what you will. So Hank confronts the bully for Peggy. Remember this. This, along with helping Peggy come up with a plan, along with later holding down the prisoner when he goes to attack Peggy, along with moral support, are all times that Peggy was helped by Hank specifically. Then the episode takes a dive for a random subplot, if you can call it that, and the episode tries to tug tears out of my non-caring body by trying to evoke sympathy for Peggy Hill's stubborn stupidity. I don't care because Hank predicted this and still has to clean up her mess. So Peggy Hill has to explain herself and Wesley tries to egg her on. But the sack of idiocy used all of the evidence against her. I mean, they could check him for cocaine, but they aren't thorough. They let Peggy smuggle it in at least 3 times. He also admitted to using it, but I guess there's no evidence so he can't be charged for it. Alright, so with no evidence, he tries to lash out at Peggy, but gets restrained. Now, if there were ever an award for a worst person in animation history, knowing what you know about Peggy Hill, this following scene is what made me do this review specifically.
Well, I guess someone owes me an apology.
I wouldn't hold your breath. I don't think Wes even apologized for those people he killed.
I was talking about you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, do you even know what you're apologizing for?
No, I'm sorry, but I don't.
I accept.
She was warned about getting into something shady. It ended up being shady. She receives help because of a miracle and her husband, then completely dismisses it as her handling herself. So she learned nothing and is bound to mess up again. Jeez, this episode is just an avalanche of problems that, in my opinion, could have been avoided with a little wiser writing. There was no subplot to fall back on. That really wasn't just disguised filler, and this episode might have shown Peggy at her worst. Jeez, Hank, you must be very ignorant to this, or just the nicest man in the world. Mind you, this is season 3, so these characters have been firmly established. Although King of the Hill is one of my favorite cartoons, this is one of the worst in the series. But you know what I learned? You can smuggle in drugs as long as you disguise them as board games. The more you know. Alpha out.